Lapse here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
We turn now to the untold history of the United States. Academy Award-winning filmmaker Oliver Stone has taken on 3 American presidents in JFK, Nixon, and W. A Vietnam War veteran, he was decorated with a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. As a filmmaker, he's tackled the most controversial aspects of the Vietnam War in his classics Platoon and Born on the 4th of July. He revealed the greed of the financial industry in the Hollywood hit Wall Street and the sequel, Wall Street 2, Money Never Sleeps. And he's explored Latin America through his films Salvador, Comandante, and South of the Border.
Now Oliver Stone and historian Peter Kuznick from American University have teamed up to produce a 10-part Showtime series called Oliver Stone's Untold History of the United States. It also features a companion book with a similar name. Drawing on archival findings and recently declassified documents, the filmmakers critically examine U.S. history from the atomic bombing of Japan to the Cold War to the fall of communism and continuing all the way through to the Obama administration. This is the trailer for the Showtime miniseries.
History is exciting, and I want to make it as exciting as it can be. We take a history subject and we make it not only dramatic, but we are compassionate. I always felt there's a disconnect about what's officially reported and what actually happened. We can't accept the stuff that's handed down. This is the key to the whole series, is to find out how we got to where we are and who we are. It's a great, great story.
That was the trailer for Oliver Stone and Peter Kuznick's 10-part Showtime series called The Untold History of the United States. The first episode of the series aired on Monday night on Showtime. It'll re-air on Monday evenings at 8 p.m. It's also available on demand. For more, the award-winning director Oliver Stone joins us here in New York, and we're joined by his co-author, Peter Kuznick, professor of history and director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Oliver Stone, you've been working on this for years, unbeknownst to many people. Why?
The trailer looked pretty epic. From here to here, it's like a Cecil B. DeMille movie from 1940s to... It was a big job, 4.5 years off and on. I did do 3 feature films and 2 documentaries during that period, but Peter was on we started in 2008, and it's been 4.5. So we originally discussed Wallace and the bomb in 1997 when he was teaching at American University, and I was there in one of his classes, and we talked about making a documentary of about an hour and a half on. He's an expert on the atomic, on weaponry, and especially the atomic bomb. He founded the Department of Nuclear Studies at American. And Henry Wallace he can explain to you, is the key to the link. Would we have dropped the bomb? That's the origin myth of this. Every school kid, still my daughter in her school, in private school, in good school, is still learning this. We dropped the bomb because we had to, because the Japanese resistance was fanatic, and we would have lost many American lives taking Japan. This is there's no alternative to that story, and we are beginning the process in Chapter 1, 2, and 3 of saying the bomb did not have to be dropped for strategic reasons and also because it was morally reprehensible. But strategically, it made no sense.
Professor Kuznick, why?
It made no sense because the Japanese were already defeated. They were looking for a way out of the war. The United States knew they were defeated. Truman refers to the intercepted July 18th telegram as the telegram from the Jap emperor asking for peace. The United States...
And the Japanese emperor asking for peace.
Yeah, but that was called, he says the Jap emperor asking for peace, is Truman's exact words on that. Everybody else knew that they were militarily defeated and looking for a way out. But the people who knew that the best were the Russians, because they were trying to get the Russians to intervene on their behalf to get them better surrender terms. And also because their strategy was to welcome American invasion and then to inflict heavy damages and then force better surrender terms. But once the Russians invaded, then that undermined both their diplomatic strategy and their military strategy. So that was what really ended the war. It was not the bombing. We'd already been bombing Japanese cities. We'd firebombed over 100 cities. Destruction reached 99.5% of the city of Toyama. From the Japanese standpoint, whether it was 200 bombs, 200 planes and 1,000 bombs, or 1 plane and 1 bomb, didn't change the equation. But the Soviet invasion fundamentally changed it, and that's what forced the final surrender.
On August 9.
August 9,
Stalin moved a huge army to the east off from the German frontier to and wiped out the Kwangtung army in about I think 2 days or 1 day, and was moving towards Japan. So if you let a month go by, you know, if we really are interested in ending this war and using Russian troops, it's perfect. We can do it.
Well, let's turn to a clip from the series. This one challenges the prevailing logic of World War II being the United States' so-called good war.
Generations of Americans have been taught that the United States reluctantly dropped atomic bombs at the end of World War II to save the lives of hundreds of thousands of young men poised to die in an invasion of Japan. But the story is really more complicated, more interesting, and much more disturbing. Many Americans view World War II nostalgically as the good war in which the United States and its allies triumphed over German Nazism, Italian fascism, and Japanese militarism. Others, not so blessed, remember World War II as the bloodiest war in human history. By the time it was over, 60 to 65 million people lay dead, including an estimated 27 million Soviets, between 10 and 20 million Chinese, 6 million Jews, over 6 million Germans, 3 million non-Jewish Poles, 2.5 million Japanese, and 1.5 million Yugoslavs. Austria, Britain, France, Italy, Hungary, Romania, and the United States each counted between 250,000 and 500,000 dead.
Well, Oliver Stone, the good war, and of course the war with the most carnage in the history of the world. Right?
It's a huge story, and it's where we begin. But we deal with the three empires, Britain and the U.S., and the rivalry between the U.S. and Britain. A lot of school kids don't know that the British Empire is a dominant empire and has so many resources around the world. And Churchill is fighting, among other things, for the retention of the colonies and all through Middle East, the oil supplies, Greece, very important, North Africa, Egypt, Suez, India, Singapore, and that's what he's trying to get back. And he never starts the second front for about 2 years. It's been promised in '42 to Stalin. Stalin is meanwhile rolling the Germans back and winning the war, as the British and the Americans are periphery pecking in retaining the British colonies for Britain. It's an interesting story. The British, for example, go into Athens in 1944 after they've liberated it, so to speak, but they end up fighting in street battles with the communist resistance fighters who fought very heroically against the Nazis. We put in a Nazi, a Greek who was working with the Nazis. Right away, we put him into the premiership. It's a dirty story, dirty story.
What most Americans don't know about the war, most Americans think that the United States won the war. But the reality is that throughout most of the war, the American and the British combined were fighting 10 German divisions. The Russians alone were fighting 200 German divisions. That's why Churchill says it was the Russians who tore the guts out of the Nazi army.
Let's go back to another clip from your series, The Untold History of the United States. This one is about Henry Wallace, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's vice president and agriculture and commerce secretary. It suggests that the Midwestern statesman would have put America on a radically different trajectory had his path to the presidency not been blocked by the Democratic Party leaders in 1944.
Seeing the war clouds gathering clearly on the horizon, Roosevelt decided to break with precedent and run for a third term in 1940 against the strongly anti-war Republican candidate Wendell Willkie, a corporate attorney from Indiana. The stakes were high. The nation might soon be at war. Roosevelt weighed his options and chose his controversial Secretary of Agriculture, Henry A. Wallace, as his running mate. Wallace had overseen an extraordinary return to agricultural prosperity during the Great Depression. These policies had been at the heart of the New Deal. For the urban poor, Wallace also had provided food stamps and school lunches. He instituted programs for land use planning and soil conservation. He carved out his credentials in the New Deal years as an outspoken anti-fascist. Considered the scientific community's best ally, Wallace spoke out strongly against the building up of false racial theories in rebuke of the Hitler policies in Germany.
George Carver, born into slavery, now a chemist at Tuskegee University specializing in botany, first introduced me to the mysteries of plant fertilization. I spent a good many years breeding corn because this scientist deepened my appreciation of plants in a way I could never forget. Superior ability is not the exclusive possession of any one race or any one class, provided men are given the right opportunities.
But Democratic Party bosses feared Wallace's views, mistrusting his devotion to principle over politics. It looked like the Wallace nomination would go up in flames when Roosevelt, angry and frustrated, wrote a remarkable letter to the assembled delegates in which he flatly turned down the presidential nomination.
The Democratic Party has failed when it has fallen to the control of those who think in terms of dollars instead of human values. Until the Democratic Party shakes off all the shackles of control fastened upon it by the forces of conservatism, reaction, and appeasement, it will not continue its march to victory. The party cannot face in both directions at the same time. Therefore, I decline the honor of the nomination for the presidency.
His wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, saved the day. The first president's wife ever to address a convention, she told disgruntled delegates that we face now a grave situation.
You cannot treat it as you would treat an ordinary nomination in an ordinary time.
The party bosses buckled and put Wallace on the ticket. They would, however, come back for their vengeance.
I've just heard the news of my nomination, and there is just one thing I want to say. I am confident that under the leadership of President Roosevelt, we shall have a united Democratic Party, victory in November, and security for the American people.
And that was the voice of Henry Wallace, nominated as vice president. Oliver Stone, your inspiration for this whole series was about Henry Wallace. Why? Talk about his significance.
I would say the inspiration was the bomb, which is perhaps the atomic bomb, because I grew up right in that period. I was born right after it, and I wanted to know. The bomb shaped all our lives, and we lived in fear of it as we were in school. Air raids, we came to near the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it haunts our policy. We were in a Cold War up until 1989, 91 with the Soviets. But it continues on, if you noticed. I mean, there was no peace dividend, and I'm wondering what happened in the 1989-91 period all the way through the 90s, and it just keeps going into the war on terror, the war on Noriega, the war on drugs. So you go back, and I talked to Peter, and he knows a lot about the bomb, and did the bomb have to start all this, and do we have to keep doing this? And the bomb is what leads you to Wallace, because Wallace was a key figure. He was supposed to be vice president in 1944, the popular choice. 65% of the Democratic voters wanted him. 2% wanted Truman, and it's an inside deal. It's really ugly. It's like a Frank Capra movie where everything is rigged from the inside. And on one particular night, and it comes down to a moment in time, like 9 seconds, when Wallace almost makes it. He almost squeezes in. The crowd is cheering, Wallace, Wallace, and the bosses convene the convention that night. And then overnight, they turn favors and so forth, and money and bribes. So Wallace does not end up as vice president. Roosevelt dies, and a little unknown party hack, really, called Harry Truman, at one of the most important times in the history of the world, becomes a small man, becomes leader of the world with all the power, and frankly, like a George Bush, he blows it.
Henry Wallace would later run for president.
He would, but as unsuccessful third-party candidate, and he smeared repeatedly as a communist at that point. But the real drama is the '44 convention.
And Wallace was very much of a visionary. He's been lost to history. If I ask my students and other people, nobody knows Henry Wallace anymore. He was an extraordinary man. When Henry Luce in 1941 said the 20th century must be the American century, the United States is going to dominate the world in every way, Wallace countered as vice president. He gave his famous speech when he said the 20th century must be the century of the common man. He calls for a worldwide people's revolution in the tradition of the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Latin American Revolution, and the Russian Revolution. He says we have to wipe out monopolies and cartels. Monopolies and cartels. He says we've got to end colonialism, end imperialism, raise standards of living around the world, and the U.S. and the Soviets have to collaborate to refashion the world at the end of the world. That was the vision that he had. The party bosses hated him, as did the Wall Street people. Wallace said that America's fascists are those who think Wall Street comes first and the country comes second. So the anti-labor people hated him, the people against civil rights hated him, and the people who were against women's rights hated him. He was the exemplar of everything good that the Democratic Party has ever stood for.
Historian Peter Kuznick and three-time Academy Award-winning director Oliver Stone will be back with